What is going on, guys and girls? I hope you're all well. The Qatar Grand Prix qualifying, or the first portion of at least, is in the books. Now, of course, this is the official proper qualifying, and this will roll through for the race on Sunday. Tomorrow we'll get qualifying for the sprint quali, which we'll get on the afternoon. But I want to focus in what's going on, Michael, Boogie Boy, Mary, moderator extraordinaire, Kaori, Henron. I hope you're all well, man. I'm going to go for about 30 to 40 minutes on this because I enjoyed that qualification. The joke is this season, I feel like I'm enjoying qualifying more than the race. Is that sacrilege? Am I allowed to say that? Along my travels, I've spoken to many of those who have worked in and around F1 and who have been sat in the paddock and been in and around some of the greats, right? And they all say that qualifying is the pinnacle of the weekend. I've doubted them. What's going on, Sylvia? I hope you're good. I've doubted them for the longest time, man. But I'm starting to see that come to fruition. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit on here and lie to you guys and peddle you out propaganda. I'm starting to see qualifying. If there's one session that I'm not going to miss, it's qualifying, and not the sprint quali neither, qualifying for the race. And it got a bit techie, man. There's so much going on. I have to take notes on this one. Qatar Grand Prix is chaos. One of the newfangled city makeshift. Am I being too harsh? Makeshift tracks, but it is as compared to your Spas and your Silverstones and the Hungaroring. It's different, right? And that I suppose a case in point is by the way they've revamped it, right? New surface, let's remember, completely new paddock. Looks incredible, by the way. If you guys have seen footage of the area around the pit lane, and I don't know, it looks all right. I'm a bit jealous. But again, that's not the racing aspect, and that's not what you guys have come here for. Mary, Madeline, Max P1 Biomar. We'll get to Max. We've got to get to Max, haven't we? In fact, you know what? Since you bring me there first, let's get Mr. Verstappen out of the way. At this point, you know what? Karun Chanduk said something in qualifying that resonated with me. As we were watching the banker lap that ultimately ended up putting Max Verstappen on P1, he said Max Verstappen was devastating, and I think that was apropos. Not a big fan of Karun as a correspondent, as a broadcaster even. I think he's a bit wooden. I don't think he necessarily identifies with the audience, especially by virtue of the fact that he's telling people that what they really want to do is go, if they don't appreciate what we're seeing this year as far as the excellence that is Max Verstappen and Red Bull, what you want to do is go and watch another sport. I think that's very cheeky, and I think that's very gatekeeping. But credit where credit is due to Karun Chanduk on this occasion. Devastating is exactly what Max was. Devastating and inevitable. Shout out to Nash of Quickstop F1 because I'm plagiarising there. That's his word. Devastating and inevitable is kind of what this chap is. And let's remember for a second, it's important to set the table here around context, because I think this explains the difference between the underperformance of Checo Perez and the outperformance that is Max Verstappen. Here's what I think we're seeing here. A couple of things. Checo Perez can't perform around these tracks where they're high speed, swooping corners, you know, your Maggots and Beckett's, your Silverstone type corners. If there aren't corners around a track where you need to jump hard on the brakes and then feather the throttle on the exit of hairpin-esque turns, see Rascasse at Monaco as a brilliant example. If you don't have those turns around a circuit, Checo Perez is always going to struggle to keep with Max Verstappen. This is just his nature. This is just his handling dynamic. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Peter Winsor will always talk about short corners. I see something ever so slightly different with Checo. Every time Checo struggles, look, around Austria, Checo will struggle because there's going to be an issue around track limits. We saw today there was an issue around track limits. And the reason why Checo has struggled is because he's always he's overkill on trying to straight line the corner. Now, in my mind, the geometric racing line, what you want to do with each and every single corner is straight line it, right? And you do that by going right to the outside. So if it's a right-hander, go right to the left of the track before turning and then straight line it. Try and minimise the angle of the corner. Checo is over-aggressive in his style when he's doing this. He's reaching. He's trying to claw back a deficit to Max Verstappen because Max is so confident and laid back and at ease and balanced with the car and its handling dynamic. Of course, it's an Adrian Newey car. He doesn't do this. He eases into the corners. He's not trying to grab. I mean, he's perfect on turning, perfect on the brakes. But as Peter Windsor says so succinctly and so eloquently, what he's more concerned with over and above minimum speed into these turns is having the balance of the car right at turning, and he does it so he's managing forward. He's got this blue sky thinking as he's managing the car. And of course, that's a function of having so much CPU and being in such a dominant package and not having a teammate to challenge you. But it's something to behold, Max Verstappen at the moment. I will be honest, it just felt inevitable. Which one of you guys in the chat can tell me that you didn't? You just almost knew that this dude is going to put in a lap. There was jeopardy there, by the way, though. Let me backtrack to this before I talk about how much of a certainty it was. Q2, Lewis Hamilton was quickest, right? But who on here ever felt for a second that was Lewis's true position, that Lewis was going to drop this on pole? Sadly, as a Lewis Hamilton fan, I was just waiting for this this genius magic Max Verstappen lap. It was almost inevitable. And it is devastating. It felt like Godzilla, just waiting for Godzilla to come and bloody take over the city. It's almost that inevitable with Max Verstappen. And again, some people will hate that. Some people will dislike the monotony and the jeopardy or the lack thereof. And I understand that. I'm completely here for that. But I mean, when somebody in any sport, when somebody's operating at that level, if you watch sport for long enough, as I have, per my grey hairs, not to give away my not insubstantial age, when you're seeing that sort of stuff, you gotta give that dude a standing ovation. He's so comfortable, he's so at ease. Do me a favour and smash the like, peddler CBD. What's going on? Q2P1, mate. I've CBD exactly the same. For a second, you kind of just watching it. I don't want to believe in Santa Claus. Watching news drop that on P1, I'm like, nobody's gonna. I'm not buying any more Wolf tickets or Snake Hole. Like I'm not so. I can't be so sporting. That naivety in a sporting context, I don't know. It just feels like a matter of time. But I will say this though, and again in the precursor, I wanted to come on and talk to you guys about this because there was in my mind. Where Red Bull have struggled in recent times, let's say over the past 24 months, is on sprint weekends, right? I know they have a brilliant package, but that's not to say it doesn't need setting up. To get it into that very narrow, optimal operating window, it does need setting up. By virtue of the fact that the Losail track at Qatar has been resurfaced, was I going to bet against them having a nightmare? Another nightmare, the likes of which they had at Singapore? Well, it's a different track, right? Less bumpy, so ride height is less of an issue. But nevertheless, you don't know, right? Humidity at Singapore was an issue for them as far as the gear shift. So why couldn't humidity be an issue again? Who knows? We'll see as the story develops over the course of this race weekend. But I wouldn't bet against them necessarily having a problem, whether that's mechanical or otherwise setup issue. Looks like they've nailed it. And the reason why I talk about the setup, because around here it's important, right? Parc Ferme, every time there's a sprint weekend, everybody needs to put the emphasis, the impetus on setup, because let's remember, after today, no touching of the setup of the cars. So they've only got one free practice session in which they can nail it, adjust and adapt. Looks like most of them have done it. But again, thinking back to Brazil 2022, thinking back to Singapore, sometimes on sprint weekends, when the track's been resurfaced, respectively, sometimes Red Bull struggle. And if you're a fan of competition, then you were rooting for something similar to happen here, right? But it didn't, or it looks at least for now like it hasn't. Well, not at least in the hands of Mr. Max Verstappen. But again, we've got to talk about Checo Perez. What is going on there? He is having a nightmare, isn't he? And almost my heart goes out to him a little bit, but there's repercussions competitively for what we're seeing from Checo Perez. I'll take some notes. Let's look at Checo Perez's record in recent history, because it's techie, peddlers. It is techie what Checo Perez is going on with here. Let's look at it. So look, I know this is Lance, who we'll get onto. 4 of 9 front row. So he's put it on front row. But in that RB19, you expect him to be putting it on the front row. 9 of 9, even though McLaren are coming. Still got the fastest car, ostensibly. He's not even close. Checo Perez has got to do better. Here's where it gets techie. 7 of 16 of the past races, Checo's failed to make Q3. Listen, that's just unacceptable. I'm sorry. By any account, you can't. That's too much. That level, listen, what we're talking about is a difference in extents and not kinds between Max Verstappen and Checo Perez. That extent, that much of an underperformance to where you're not getting into Q3 that much of the time is just unacceptable. Now, I saw Christian Horner just now doing an interview with Simon and Karun, and he very much, he was almost uncannily, atypically empathetic towards Checo Perez. The question that Lazenby pitched at Christian was, so how do you manage this? How do you get Checo Perez out of this rut? And it is a rut. Let's have it right. This is the truth that we're talking to now. We're not going to sugarcoat this. This is underperformance of humongous proportions as borne out by the difference and the frequency of that difference, or the frequency with which that difference is occurring between Checo and Max Verstappen. But I digress. Christian Horner was asked the question, how do you turn this around for Checo Perez? The response came back from Christian Horner, very uncharacteristically empathetic towards Checo Perez's plight. He said, listen, the management style that will help Checo Perez isn't so much a kick up the arse as a hug, an arm around the shoulder. At this point, Checo Perez is so low in terms of his demeanour and his morale that he just needs a hug, right? He needs a morale lift, a boost to his self-esteem to turn around this rut, this glutton of underperformance. He just needs a foot in the door, right? A second place, a first would be good. A couple times when he can ping together Q3 performances and decent ones at that. Put it on the front row for a couple of races back to back. It's hard being an F1 driver, pedalers. I'll be honest, tenors, what's going on. P3 is looking good. We will get to Lewis. He's not done too badly there. Of course, he's benefited from a couple of track infringements via Mr. Piastri and Mr. Norris, but it's not to. Lewis will take that. Lewis will take that, and especially on the back of that massive correction that he had going into one of those right-handers. But listen, Checo Perez needs something, and I'm quite happy for him that this is peacetime for Red Bull. There's nothing at stake, right? And this is the criticism that people will leverage at Max Verstappen. Well, anybody can look like $1 gazillion when nobody's breathing down your neck. While Lewis Hamilton, the other protagonist, the guy who's going to pose the biggest challenge to Max Verstappen. Anybody can look $1 million when you've got no challenge, right? The naysayers will say. And I hear that. But by virtue of the difference between Checo Perez and Max Verstappen, I don't know, you got to give Max some credit. And by the same token, the equal and opposite is also true. You got to leverage some criticism at the Mexican Minister of Defense, right? I'm not mad at Christian Horner for talking about the way in which he's going to manage Checo Perez out of this rut. I think he's nailed that. That's bang on. But what sticks out to me as far as Christian Horner's very uncharacteristic empathy. Let's remember that you remember the Netflix clip where Jerry Allen was like, Checo Perez has he sealed himself as a Red Bull driver going forward, right? And Christian Horner, gracias to a bit of surreptitious, skullduggerous Netflix editing. You see, Christian doesn't even respond. He just sips from his daddy cup, doesn't respond. And he says, I say all that to say this, that Red Bull are always going to be cutthroat and ruthless as far as their driver selection. But because it's peacetime and because there is no challenge, they don't need to be. They have time now between now and the end of the season to stop the glut, to stop the Checo Perez rot. They've got time. And I suppose by virtue of the fact that Mercedes aren't nobody's competitive with that RB19. They are gone clear. Anywhere to the 5/10 around here, wasn't it? Bloody Nora, half a second over the course of a lap. It's not close. Do me a favour, guys, smash that like, please, because it's free. It's not close, and they can afford for that. And I tangent very nicely into James Vowles' soliloquy about Mercedes and their plans over the next few months to develop a car that looks ostensibly a lot more like the RB19. Ergo, compete on race pace and quali trim with that RB19. That they're full speed ahead on developing a rocket ship, the W15 for next year. He's hoping. And if James Vowles, as I do believe him, James Vowles, it does inspire a lot of confidence. Something about the dude that smacks of competence. Not lost on me that the lull in Mercedes performance has come when James Vowles was outsourced to Ineos to go and do the America Cup or whatever that boating race is. But I say all that to say this, Stephen. How ugly does Russell? Oh my gosh. I will get to it, Stephen. I just want to nail this Checo Perez thing and Red Bull. And I say all that to say this. Tomorrow, or next season even, if Mercedes can build themselves a car that's capable of competing with Red Bull and that RB20, which will, of course, be a rocket ship again. Don't expect Adrian Newey to just drop off. It's Adrian Newey, for crying out loud. He is that guy. Very rarely misses. Everybody makes design philosophy mistakes. Everybody does make mistakes. But the genius ones, the goated ones, a la Adrian Newey, make them far less frequently than the rest. So don't expect Adrian Newey to just drop off a cliff. That RB19's going nowhere. The question is, the key question, the meat in this story is, can the rest catch up? Do they have the engineering / mechanical minerals to bridge that gap between now and the next massive reg change, 2026? Who knows? But there is a brilliant clip on YouTube for those of you who are subscribed to the Sky Sports F1 channel, where James Vowles is. He talks a good game, does James? Doesn't over-reg it. It's not bluster. He's just laying out the action plan. He's talking about things that they're learning, not just from Red Bull, but from their customer teams. Let's not forget that Aston Martin and McLaren both have Mercedes engines. So there are lessons that Mercedes can learn from just looking at McLaren and their line of travel as far as their design philosophy is concerned. Same thing with Aston. There are lessons to be learned because McLaren are a lot closer, I think, particularly on race pace, to Red Bull than are the rest, particularly Mercedes. Even in the back of this qualifying result. There are lessons to be learned, says James, from even the slower teams, and I'm here for that. Build yourself a rocket ship, Mercedes. Por favor, please. Next season will be epic if we get that. But hey, if they do, again, let me get to the point, Cameron, and I'm riffing here. I'm going long-winded. I'm taking the Checo Perez line into this live chat. There's a lot to talk about. If Mercedes do as millions of F1 fans around the world hope they do, and build themselves a rocket ship that's worthy of competing with RB20 next year, then Red Bull might have a problem, ladies and gents. They might have a problem, right? Especially if Checo Perez's underperformance continues. Here's why. Listen, let's work it over the course of a Grand Prix, right? Let's say, as has been happening fairly frequently of late. So last race at Suzuka, Max had to defend to Oscar on one side and Lando on the other side. A pincer movement is dangerous, particularly around the first set of pit stops. If Max Verstappen, this is, you know where we saw this? Think back to 2021. 2021, Lewis Hamilton, the humanity, because Lewis Hamilton had to fight a two-headed monster in Checo Perez and Max Verstappen pretty much every single race, particularly towards the latter stage of that championship. If Checo Perez's underperformance continues and one of those other teams can build a car capable of competing with Red Bull race in, race out, Max and Red Bull might have themselves a problem on their hands by virtue of the fact first pit stops is perfect as an example, right? First round of pit stops, what do you do? Well, the other team behind you, since they're in 2 and 3, if George and Lewis can maintain those positions on Sunday as an example, Well, they can split strategy, can't they? One can pull the undercut, one can try and pull the overcut, or match Max Verstappen's strategy even. Hence why I think they've got time now, Red Bull. I don't think it's mission critical now for them to solve for Checo Perez's underperformance, but it will be at some point. That train's never late. No one's dominance lasts forever in high-level sports, particularly in F1. It's going to get techie, isn't it? That's all that I will say on that. 120 of you watching concurrently. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Let me have a look at some of your comments, Stephen. RB20 will be insane. Of course, it's gonna be a rocket ship, but I just don't know whether, like I've said, I'll say it again for the avoidance of doubt. That train's never late. James Val spoke about it very eloquently. If you can go and check it out on YouTube, there's 2 videos. One where he's talking about Andretti, and again, we'll get onto the Andretti bid very, very shortly. Gatekeeping, any, always going to be the way. But there's another video where he's talking about their development journey as Mercedes, how they're going to try and bridge the gap to Red Bull between now and next year. Lewis Hamilton he's sent out the rallying cry, hasn't he? Lewis said the next few months for Mercedes are the most important months of development in his whole career. I don't even think he's exaggerating. That's the joke. I think he's on the money there, Lewis, particularly with 2026 in mind. It's going to get chaotic. It's going to get very chaotic. I think we may be in for some very exciting times, guys. It's going to get techie. 111 of you watching currently. Do me a favour and smash the like. 27 likes thus far. There's got to be, my maths aren't mathing, peddlers. That's better. Do me a favour and smash the like. So go on. All right, let's talk about Lewis quickly. Missed opportunity again, isn't it? I feel like Lewis, what I want to see from Lewis going forward, just tidy. This was a very messy qualifying session for loads of these guys. Lando fell victim to a couple of mistakes. Surely Lando just put in a banker lap like Piastri did and like Max did. Put in a banker. That Lando's in 10th is a massive. He's dropped the ball, hasn't he? And not dissimilar to Lewis. Okay, so Lewis got a banker in ultimately, but that mistake on that last lap, and I know this track is one of those. Listen, it's very, very sandy. The rate of evolution is crazy because of that sand, because it's newly resurfaced, because of the way that the temperature change and that the way that the tyres interact with those temperature changes over the course of a session. FP1, they would have set up their cars in very hot, humid conditions. This last session, this qualifying session for the race on Sunday, very, very different, right? Very, very different. So the set, your apples and oranges as far as the setup. You kind of want to set the car up under conditions that are equal to what you're going to be qualifying on, or at least the race. It's techie, and I get it, I hear it, but I don't know. I don't know. We'll say this about Max, actually. Anytime there's like difficult conditions, like changeable, varying conditions, like sand or kind of winds coming from behind you into the turn, and then as you go through the turn, you start getting the crosswind. Anytime it's difficult like that, those are conditions on the wicks, like the Maxes and the Lewises usually, because they are God tier in terms of their handling dynamic and their ability to read changeable circumstances as far as mechanical grip. That they excel, right? So they talked to Max after the race, and he was like, "Listen, it's tough out there to read that circumstance, and the ever evolving track is tricky." So the likes of Checo, they didn't stand a chance. Checo on that track in that circumstance, even in that RB19, he's got no chance. And so in those conditions, the gap between the best, the great ones, and the also rans is going to be bigger. And I suppose I say all that to say this, that I'm surprised and a little bit upset that Lewis made that mistake. That big, on that right-hander, he experienced the big correction, right? Massive oversteer that he needed to correct for. I understand why it happens, but so highly do I rate Lewis Hamilton that I would expect him to use that, to leverage those difficult circumstances, to gap the likes of George Russell. I understand if Mr. Windsor were on here, he'd warn me. guard against criticising Lewis Hamilton too much. He's got a lot on his plate, right? Juggling a car that's still not right, that Mercedes, that W40. So it's coming, they're getting there, it's improving race by race, but it's still not right. What they've done there, what they have in that Mercedes, that W14, is an unpredictable base. What you need in what Adrian Newey's built is a more predictable base that enables the god tier ones, a la a Lewis or a Max, the predictability, the stable platform from which they can kind of push right. They can extract that extra tenth, and the Mercedes guys still don't have that, sadly. But it is techie. It's techie for the guys, but I digress. So a little bit, I say all that to say, a little bit disappointed with Lewis. I expected him difficult conditions. Max excels. Anytime Max is excelling, Lewis absolutely still has the core capabilities to gap George Russell. It's the fact that he's on third by virtue of the McLaren boys. Mr. Piastri dropping to sixth on the back of a track infringement. Lando Norris dropping to sixth on the back of 2 track infringements. Saddens me ever so slightly. George Russell gets it done. Let me talk to George Russell. George Russell starts on second, so we're going to pay attention, Sunday peddlers, for that pincer move into turn 1. If the Mercedes boys have done their due diligence and research, they will be watching what McLaren did at Suzuka. They have an opportunity to give Max Verstappen fits into turn 1. And if they can stay with him, big if, massive hypothetical, if they can stay with him early on, then there is the opportunity to pull a pincer move into the first round of pit stops. But again, I think that's more a question for next year when they've got proper race pace, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Touch wood. Right, let me talk about Lance Stroll. What is going on with Lance? And again, my human side empathises with Lance Stroll. Let's have a look at some of the stats, because it's chaos again, isn't it? So that's his 4th Q1 elimination in a row. He's got no points since the summer break. And that's made worse, of course, when your teammate on the other side of the garage, Fernando Alonso, 2-time, potentially 5-time, with another 8 points cumulatively over the course of his career. He's going great guns. The car's not SH1T, peddlers. That car is a decent car. Alonso is proof positive of that. As the fact that, again, similar story, right? These are common threads and this is a common denominator between Red Bull and Aston Martin cognizant. This is the story here, is the adverse variance of the weaker driver versus the stronger. That's right, Mary. You smash that. Smash that like. No, I'm going to read some of your comments, I promise. But I really want to get this qualifying was chaos for plot lines and narratives. Jean, I'm behind. Lots of Checo talk. Jean, I hope I'm getting the name right. There needs to be lots of Checo talk, because I think we're going to be talking about this. All eyes on Checo Perez between now and next season. Because if he doesn't solve for this, if Checo Perez 2021 doesn't turn up next year, and Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren continue to develop on the same line of trajectory, we're going to have, Red Bull are going to have issues. Let me talk about Lance Stroll. Let's get to the crux of it. Massive underperformance, not too different from what we're seeing with Checo Perez. But these guys, listen, let me lay the case for in the first instance. So the gift and the curse with Aston Martin and Red Bull is that the benchmark is always going to be Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen respectively now. And anyone not named Lewis Hamilton on that grid isn't going to fare well in those circumstances as a driver. There's just no one. Not yet. Lando will get there one day. Charles will get there one day. But in my humble opinion, it's a 2-tiered grid at the moment as far as driver competence over the course of a season, of course. There is Lewis, there's Max, and there is Alonso, and then you have the other 17. I will be honest. Lance, we spoke about this last year, didn't we? Not to tap myself on the back and do the old Nostradamus thing. I told you so. Because again, sports will make mugs out of anybody who thinks they can get it right 100% of the time. Nobody bats 1,000. But we did talk last year about this. Lance Stroll in that Aston Martin was always going to struggle against Fernando Alonso. It's not a fair comparison. We are talking apples and oranges as far as drivers. One will get into the car and hustle it along. One will always struggle with a setup that's not absolutely perfectly aligned with their preferred handling dynamic, the way that they like to drive. The first is Fernando El Plan Alonso. The second is Lance Stroll. Listen, there's loads of stories being bandied around that Lance Stroll's his dreams, his hopes weren't even to be an F1 driver, that he wanted to be a tennis player. It's only by virtue of Papa Stroll that he was almost living his dreams vicariously through his son. He was pushed into F1 driving. He didn't choose. He was chosen, which is chaos, right? To quote John Doe and Seven, that's chaos. And I think what we're seeing here is a function of that. He was always going to struggle, but I think ever since he had his accident earlier on in the season and broke his bloody hand, I don't think Lance has had time to... You remember that they rushed him back and he did all right in the first instance, didn't he? But I think after those injuries, you kind of want to... I was always told by my physiotherapist, anytime you've got an injury, you want to... When you feel okay... You want to say, okay, say if I feel okay 2 weeks from now, you want to put another 2 to 3 weeks on there. Just give yourself an extra bit of leeway. And in my heart of hearts, I feel, and I can't verify this, I'm guessing that he was given the time requisite to come back. But I'm guessing that Lance was rushed back a tad. And that's borne out by the fact that since summer, how many points has Lance Stroll scored since the summer break even? Zero. Meanwhile, the chap on the other side of the garage, Mr. Fernando El Plan Alonso, is going great guns. That is techie. Doesn't look good for him. And that's why you see that outpouring of grief and emotion from Lance Stroll. Stacked it again. Doesn't even get out of bloody Q2. What a joke in an Aston Martin that's ready and capable to do exactly that. It looks bad for Lance and the pressure. And again, I will leverage and plagiarise the theory of my guy, Mr. Peter Windsor. Go and check out that interview on the Mothership channel, by the way. Chaos. 80,000 views and counting. Let's go. But Peter would always say, as much as the on-track ability matters, what's probably more important is in here, right? Is in here. Because they've all grown up the same. We've all got that experience in karting. They've all come up through the formula and won GP2, etc., etc. That's not the differentiator. Up here is. So those who have that extra CP, and you can talk to any performance engineer, you could talk to, Blake will tell you this, right? And he was, of course, performance engineer to some of the great ones in Checo, Perez, Pauli di Resta, and Max Verstappen. CPU, the extra CPU, as far as your cerebral, your mental, that's really bloody important. Super, super important. Lance doesn't have any additional spare CPU when he's driving that car at the moment, and it is a good car, and it shows. This is why he keeps making mistakes. This is why he keeps overdriving, and this is why he keeps going out in Q3. It's not good enough for Lance. And what's even worse, by the way, peddlers, it's okay to be disappointed, Lance. Like, we can't. Everybody makes mistakes. Okay, so you've made a few consecutively over the past 3 or 4 Grand Prix, even failing to get out from Q3. I don't hate that. I can't condemn somebody to death for a mistake. But the footage, and you guys will have all seen it, when he gets out the car and his personal trainer approaches him, he's pointing something to Lance, and he's like, he doesn't want him to just go in the back straight away. But Lance is so disappointed at yet again another underperformance. He just wants to get in the back. So he gives his personal trainer, he gives his trainer like a shoe away. And then his personal trainer goes for him again, doesn't he? He's like, no. You got to come back. And then, luckily for Lance, the angle of the camera is sufficient to where you can't quite see what he's put. We all know that he pushed his trainer there. He pushed his trainer, and it wasn't a half push, was it? That was a full-blown push. I think Lance is very lucky. He's been blessed there by the camera angle, the poor camera angle, because it doesn't look good anyway. These guys, we expect these guys to be role models and not to abuse physically their personal trainers, right? It's not a good look, especially for the son of the owner of the bloody team. But I understand. I wish that he didn't push anyone. And then what's worse, oh my goodness, have you seen him in the interview? Oh my goodness. Right. So here's what happened with the interview. I had to write this down. Okay. Because he was curt, wasn't he? Super abrupt. How did he get on out there, Lance? The broadcaster says ish. And he doesn't say ish. He says SH1T. What happened out there? Says the broadcaster. Lance says, I don't know. This is chaos. How do you fix for this, Lance? The broadcaster asks. Keep driving. I don't know. Keep driving. And then he walks off. This is the son of the owner of the team. The reputational hazard. Sponsors will not be loving that at all. Here's what I will say about Lance Lasty. Of course, he's got to improve, but he has, because he's the son of the owner of the team, there'll be an additional burden on him, a responsibility to behave and conduct himself in a certain way. And hitherto, up to now, he's been pitch perfect, right? All the exam answers, he's been borderline PR 63 even, esque. Like he's nailed all the answers each and every single time. But this is the first time when we started to see cracks. And because he's the son of Lawrence, the guy who's ostensibly their charismatic leader, who's pummeled all of these hundreds of millions into the new factory, 200 million worth into the factory alone, hundreds of millions into the rest of the team, of course, a lot of which will be fixing Lance's car, by the way. Lance now has a debt of gratitude. There is a way to conduct yourself here, Lance. And sadly, what we saw there, not up to scratch, mate. Not up to scratch. And for me, the behaviour, probably more important than the performance here. But again, we don't hate that, right? Sometimes we want this from our F1 drivers, just so we know they're human. Sometimes it can get a bit too cookie cutter, right? Too cookie cutter all the time. If you watch the press conferences yesterday, bloody each and every single one of them where they were leveraged, the question came through, Andretti, talk to us, good or bad, for or against. All of them were like, well, I defer to whatever the FIA and the FOM say. What? That means, you don't have an opinion. It's almost like Fernando Alonso. They kept just looking at Fernando as the elder statesman in the press conference to see what he was going to say. Fernando said blue, and they went to each and every single one of them, the rest of them in the press conference, and they were all like, yep, blue. And then Fernando would say yellow, and they'd all go yellow. I agree, Fernando. Bloody Nora. Can't we get drivers are the assets of F1? They're characters. And I mean, the best that we got out of them was a bit of shuffleboard in some game that they were all playing. I'm not interested in that. Talk to us about, give us something, okay? Surely, drivers, talk to us about, and again, I'm going to cite Peter here, Mr. Windsor. Talk to us about, like, you've made a mistake. What happened? Even Gasly, you will have heard them talk to Gasly, and we'll get to the boys at Alpine. 142 if you're watching concurrently. Do me a favour, smash the like. Guys, we'll be back trying to do the same thing after the race, but I'm going to start to do these lives a little bit more. I've been going on long, haven't I? I hope you guys are enjoying this, man. 42 minutes, Cameron. Oh, go on then. We're going over 18. I'm sure I said I was going to go 45 minutes, no longer. He's a liar, that Cameron F1. Snake oil and wolf tickets. And look, he's lost his train of thought now. Oh, I can't even remember. Can't have been that bloody important. Oh, we're talking about the lack of cookie cut, the lack of personality of these drivers at the press conference. Why have the press conference, the drivers' press conference, if these guys are just going to give us the cookie cutter answers, the cliche ones? Oh, well, we met with the team and I'm not prepared to give you any more than that. Said Pierre Gasly when talking about Suzuka in the last race and what happened between him and Ocon. Obviously, he was team orders, give back the place to Esteban Ocon. Wasn't too happy. None too pleased was the Frenchman. It was always going to come to a head with these boys, wasn't it? Ocon and Gasly, never friends. They never have been friends. There's always been friction between the two of them, even coming up through karting and the feeder formula. It was never going to work well. They were always going to come to a head. And here you have it at Suzuka, to which Pierre Gasly responds, I spoke with the team, and that's all that I'm going to say about it. The interviewer responds, Tom Clarkson, I think, legend. So are you happy with the outcome of the meeting at Alpine, Pierre? And Pierre just repeats his bloody first answer, doesn't he? We had a meeting, and that's all that I say about that. Pierre, like, what are you... Come on, Pierre. Give us something, mate. I know there is commercial value on the line, and you can't be seen to... You can't step outside of you're incentivized almost to give us the cookie cutter answer. Get it completely. But bloody Nora, give us something, surely. It's like, I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I think that F1 misses the opportunity via access to its drivers. Again, the lack thereof. We only see them. Let me tell you this story. I didn't want to come in here and just I don't want to be an F1 preacher. I want to add some value on all of these streams, give you my opinions and some evidence to back that up. So I was watching last night. I wanted to watch some stuff, right? And obviously Peter Windsor on his YouTube channel, market leading F1 YouTube channel, by the way. If you're not subscribed already, get over to that and have a look. He'd done his pre-race warm-up. Do you think there was another pre-race warm-up from F1 TV or Sky Sports F1? This is last night, British Standard Time. No, there wasn't one. F1's dropped theirs. I think F1 dropped theirs like after midnight last night. I was like, what? There's not like a massive bugbear. It's almost like YouTubers out here, like the market leading ones, the likes of Tomo, Aldas, Baxty B, are out there doing Driver 61, of course, out Nasher, Quick Stop F1, are out there doing F1's bidding for them. Where's the content, peddlers? This is like, it's Qatar. Max Verstappen probably is going to win the championship on Saturday, tomorrow. And there's no preview to speak of on Thursday night. Yeah, of course. Yeah, they know what's going on, eh? They know what's going on. Go on then, Alex Albon, track limits. Okay, so we're just talking about the track now. Look, I provided a bit of context already. Let's not forget, peddlers, not easy to drive around a resurfaced track. And remember, a lot of these guys haven't got a lot of race time around here, so they would have been in the sim and they will understand. But it's different once you get in, right? Especially when there's sand, especially when it's hot and humid in FP1 and then bloody qualifying comes around in essence FP2, and it's a completely different dynamic, a different ball game as far as the way the track is handling, the way that the car's behaving. It was set up in different track temps and different air temps. It's almost like a game of Risk. It's a poker game, right? I empathise with the drivers in that sense, and the track limits was always going to be an issue. Not quite as bad as Austria a couple of races back, but similar sort of story. And the reason why track limits are an issue, peddlers, not to teach you all to suck eggs, but, no pun intended, Max Verstappen, but there is track time. If you can nail that, if you can take every millimetre of track limits up until the point when you've infringed, that should be the quickest way around this track, especially, again, Mr. Windsor will talk about short corners, but when the corners are quick, like they are around Qatar, Losail, or Silverstone, or Spa, Eau Rouge, Maggots and Beckett's, then it makes sense. You are incentivized, if you want to go from lights to flag the quickest way possible, you're incentivized to use all the track possible to straight line these corners, because simply, physics, right? You can go quicker through the corners that way. Track limits was always going to be techie, and so even in the first session, right, Q1, within a couple of laps, there were three laps were deleted because of track limits. And track limits, by the way, it's the white lines. It's not the Armco or the bloody red and white. It's not the curb. And the reason why I say that, because there's a bit of confusion. When Lewis was defending to George, people said that, listen, he was still on the track because he had two wheels on the curb. Apparently, the stewards are being consistently inconsistent again, aren't they? Standard. Let's talk about McLaren very quickly. Lando, oh, what's he doing after commentators curse from Cameron after I've been bigging him up on the shakedown for the past couple of weeks. I'm not sure whether Oscar Piastri will ever become the driver that Lando is. He goes and does something daft like this, and he was brilliant at Suzuka. Let me just say that for the avoidance of doubt. Race pace, okay, so he was beaten by his younger, fresher face teammate in Oscar Piastri in Quali at Suzuka. But in terms of race pace, they weren't even close. What Lando was close to is a Max Verstappen who had clearly taken his foot off the throttle, and I don't think that's worthy of mention, right? That's worthy of mention. Lando is absolutely to be commended for that. Mac, I'm not saying sprint races aren't my favourite. I'm not a big fan. Menace again. Lando is kicking himself. I'll talk about the sprint races shortly. But yeah, Lando, I'm a bit disappointed in Lando because it feels like, again, not dissimilar to Lewis, it feels like there was an opportunity there for him to at least make the front row again. Okay, so Max might have been half a second down the road, and still, but that's to be expected. I just feel like had Lando put in a banker lap, he would have been in third. He would have been second row at worst. So a bit of a missed opportunity. It's weird the way that these guys are such god tier level drivers, but just sometimes they have brain fade, don't they? Sure, like you've got 2 laps here. You can't. Okay, I've raced, but not, of course, at the level of these guys. But surely you just put your common sense cap on. If you've got a banker, a decent lap, not balls to the wall, but if you've got a banker lap in, that enables you to kind of relax, your shoulders ease back, and you can focus in, singularity of focus for the proper hot lap. Surely, maybe I'm talking out my backside here, but the fact that Lando didn't get a lap in, I mean, is that not racing naivety? I always thought Lando was god tier as far as his race savvy, not quite Alonso levels, but in and around that same ballpark. Sochi a couple of years back discounted, but I thought he was more intelligent than that. I mean, Singapore, the fact that between him and Carlos Sainz, they could work that through in real time, that was their solve to the problem of the 2 challenging, charging Mercedes of Russell and Lewis Hamilton. I think that shows that Lando has a racing brain. But yeah, again, he does this, and it makes me question, can he drive? Absolutely. Are you joking? Lando Norris can definitely drive. I think he's principal among the next ones that come after Sir Lewis and Max and Alonso. I think he might be pole position of the next ones. I rate Lando that highly. But when he does something like that today, I don't know. It's a bad mistake, that. Bad mistake, not thinking it through. Similar story with Oscar Piastri. So Lando starts on 10th. Similar story with Oscar Piastri. Starts on 6th after having a track chalked off for similar thing, infringement. But Oscar, being a bit more savvy than his teammate Lando, did the smart thing and got a banker lap in. A pace in hand over the rest of them, did those McLarens. And shout out to Zach Brown and that development team, because again, I definitely didn't see that coming. I was on the last lap with Tomo talking all sorts of slander to my guy Peter on pole. Shout out to the boys at McLaren F1 TV, or McLaren Fan TV even. I was killing McLaren. I definitely didn't see them progressing as fast as they have over the past couple of months. And ostensibly now, who's going to say that they're not the second quick? If I can't be in a Red Bull, put me in the McLaren for now. From racing for my life, they're the second quickest. I mean, race trim. I'm telling you, not even close. Perez, we've talked about. Checker. Oh, gosh. And that Lance thing we've also talked about. Lewis, man. Lewis for a second. I was hopeful. But again, Q2 is Q2, right? You earn your corn in Q3 and race day. And when I saw Q2 again, I didn't want to believe Santa Claus was going to deliver my Christmas presents this year down the chimney. Just didn't believe it. Because there's a couple times this has happened, right? Do you remember, I want to say the very first race of the season, that it looked like in Q2, it looked like Lewis Lewis was cut, but did he put it on pole or he was close to Max Verstappen? I was like, oh, I don't want to, but I'm not buying these wolf. I can't do it. I can't do it, man. I've been in the game too long, and I did get hopeful. I wasn't going to do it again today. I saw Lewis put it on P1 for Q2. I was like, nah, I'm not buying it. Speedy though. Listen, Mercedes are coming. They've developed that car quick enough to challenge Max Verstappen's RB19. Not yet. I still think they're half a second. When Max goes balls to the wall, like foot flat to the floor, half a second round here, and this is like a 1 minute 30 lap. Oh, I don't know. And Max talked about peaky. Let me go back to Max very quickly. I didn't talk about this. So Max in his interview talked about a couple of different things, didn't he? He said that the track and the grip around the track are peaky. Remember I spoke about this earlier. Anytime there is this variability, anytime it's a difficult circumstance to drive around, wet conditions again, you're not going to beat a Max or a Lewis in or an Alonso, unless you're one of those three. In wet conditions, it's just that much harder to drive around it. It makes durable competitive advantage and USPs that much more valuable, right? It's a differentiator. That's the word that I'm looking for. In normal conditions, anybody, like any fool, can jump into a car and drive it quickly. But when it's sandy and it's humid and the wind's behind you going into the turn, and then as you exit the turn, the wind becomes a crosswind. It's like, I mean, that's where these guys, the top three, the like god tier ones, the cream of the crop as far as drivers, that's where these guys are going to excel. So when Max Verstappen says something like the grip is peaky, good luck, Checo Perez. You've got no chance, mate. Absolutely zero chance. And therein lies, and this is F1, right? This is why we love it. So in summary then, Max nails it, and again, he's more than likely going to nail sprint qualifying tomorrow. More than likely. The only hope for Checo Perez, and again, I don't... I know that the commentators are incentivized to enhance the jeopardy, to keep people tuned in. Factually, they're correct that, listen, Checo Perez is still in the fight. But I mean, come on, like, pull the other one. Really? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're selling tomorrow on? The fact that Checo Perez can still stop Max Verstappen winning a championship? Behave. Like, statistically, of course, but I mean, and I think Max Verstappen just needs to score 3 more points than Checo Perez, and he's going to do that. He'll nail it on Saturday. How do you guys feel about the championship being won on Saturday? Feels a bit, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. If only because it's never happened before, right? Doesn't feel proper. Mary, you back in news for the win. Mary, hope springs eternal. He'd need for Max to have reliability problems, wouldn't he? That's what he'd need. Macon says, if anyone's gone quick, Max just goes quicker. And that's the problem. I love it and hate it in equal measure, Macon. Like, you've got to admire it, right? But then from a competitive standpoint, when Max isn't in the race, or when he's coming from the back or whatever, like he was at Singapore, we've got the best racing that we've ever seen between like Carlos and Lando and Lewis and George. It's incredible, right? So I admire it, if only because excellence at that level. Like, I don't see that. Oh, let me say this. Oh my gosh, I've got to tell you this, guys. So I was making the video on the Mothership channel, Cameron F1. 5 reasons why you can't blame Alonso for losing to Lewis. And I started going, obviously when I'm researching it and doing a bit of due diligence, I started to watch the old Lewis Hamilton footage 07. Oh my God. That Lewis Hamilton of 07 as a rookie, fresh out of a GP2 championship. Watch it. I'm not going to say, go back and refresh. I know we were all there and probably all tuned in. In 07, that dude was a force of nature. And I'm not saying that he's diminished or he's got older and he's not the same, but he was absolutely ridiculous for the amount of aggression baked into his racing, into his style and racecraft. He'd always go for a move, and very rarely, I mean, if I go for, if any ordinary human being, even F1 driver, goes for a move that aggressively, they're going to lose their front wing. Something's going to happen. Like, do you know what I mean? There will be an accident. But he'd always be, he'd very rarely put a wheel wrong. He did these crazy aggressive maneuvers, super ruthless, and come out with his car into, honestly, when I was watching back 07, some of this, Fuji was ridiculous, like Adelaide, this dude, he was I said it on the video, he's a proper force of nature, man. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mac, and a lot went into that, and I got a bit distracted watching 07 again, just to refresh my memory. Listen, the closest that I've seen, the similarities between 07 Lewis and like 2021 Max as drivers, holy smoke, they're twins. Honestly, I don't know, I would love to see 07 Lewis against 2021 Max. I think that would be ridiculous. Anyway, I digress, guys. I'm just I'm showing how much of a geek I am. So Max Verstappen drops it on pole. George Russell is in second, and George had a good lap. I'll say that George's lap wasn't perfect, and I think the likes of Lewis, Lando, Piastri will see the George lap again. There was a right-hander there where there was a big correction from George, and he would have lost at least a tenth or two on that. I say that to say that I think the likes of Piastri and Lewis and Lando will be looking at it and thinking, missed opportunity, man. If George is on the front row with that lap, okay, so we didn't see sector 1, sector 2 on board, but sector 3 wasn't perfect from George. And I think there was opportunity to be on front row for the rest. Lewis drops it on third by virtue of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris's track infringements, drops them down to 6th and 10th respectively. Charles Leclerc beats Carlos Sainz. We're going to talk about Carlos Sainz. I mean, what is going on? Okay, listen, I'll say this. I looked at the track. This is a fast, flowy, front-end bias track, right? It's quick. Think Silverstone and Eau Rouge and all those other things. Carlos Sainz, historically, I mean, we've seen his mistakes at like, these tracks aren't Carlos Sainz tracks. Carlos Sainz is Singapore and Monaco, and I don't think that was always the case. I think that's become the case more and more as Carlos Sainz has matured, but he will always go well around. He's more of a Checo Perez in terms of his style than he is a Max Verstappen. I think because of his lineage, you would think, because he's Carlos Sainz Sr.'s son, that Carlos Sainz Jr. would be rapid around Silverstone, right? Because the car control and but you guys know that sometimes at Singapore 2018 is a case in point. Sometimes slow laps in F1 look very quick, because the longer that you're going sideways, that's energy being wasted, right? Anytime you're struggling with oversteer or a correction, that's lost time, because there are others around you that will be like their car's energy, all four wheels will be going forward. So I think Carlos has been struggling around these. Or he's always going to struggle versus Charles Leclerc at Suzuka or Silverstone, even though he did win Silverstone, even though it was a little bit fortuitous. But I think we're seeing that more from Carlos Sainz. Hence, he didn't even make it through. Did he 13th? Was he 10th or 11th? I can't even remember. I've only got the top 10 in front of me. Fernando Alonso in 4th. Again, Lance Stroll. That won't make good reading for him. Charles Leclerc in 5th. Oscar in 6th by virtue of that infringement penalty. Gasly in 7th. Ocon in 8th. Let's look out for those two tomorrow, that Alpine pairing, because the bad blood is simmering, right? That's one of those ones, that relationship between Ocon and Gasly is one of those ones that Netflix are going to use as a placeholder, right? Whilst there's no fighting, there will absolutely be an episode on those two in the next series of Drive to Survive. Love it or hate it, because that's a plot line. That's a narrative that you can clutch onto. These French, racing for a French team, grew up like stones throw away from each other, don't like each other, have never, and more than ever now. After Suzuka, going to be interesting to see how they handle that. Even coming out from the pits, Did you see the acrimony between these two? I don't know which one was in front of the other. I think it might have been Gasly. And they were doing this looked like Max and Charles DRS chicken, like early last year at Bahrain or whatever. Like they were doing this weird thing, like neither Ocon or Gasly wanted to go first, and then the other one wanted to go first, and then they both decided at the same time, well, I'm going to go first. It's weird. I don't think that meeting, whatever meeting they had with Alpine's leader last week, I think there were issues unresolved at Alpine. And you're going to see it come to the surface, as with also a couple of those others, right? Mention no names, Mercedes, because, George is full of pomp at the moment. He's come to this Grand Prix and he's done his beyond the grid. There is something about George Russell that's grinding my gears, and a brilliant driver, and he's a lovely guy, right? But there's something about his demeanor, let's say, at the moment that's grinding my gears. I watched the press conference. Alex Albon couldn't even get a word edgeways. Alex had the mic. Let him speak. I know Alex is quite timid and shy inherently, but that's his charm. George just kept on bloody over talking him. It's like, George, just let him, just I don't know, stop hogging the mic, George. Leave Alex. Let him have his 15 minutes. He barely talks as it is. Like you'll have your say in a minute, George, on the bloody Andretti thing. And then even when he found out that Lando had been demoted, when he in the interviews with Naomi after Quali, he was like, "But where's Lando?" And you could see he was just happy. He knew what had happened. He knew, he realised very quickly what had happened. But you could see on his face he was happy because he's competing with the Brits, isn't he? He wants to beat Lewis and he wants to beat Lando. And he's grinding my gear. He's a bit cheeky at the moment, is George. George Russell, first of his name. Man from Kings Lynn, Norfolk. Valtteri Bottas and Lando Norris round out your top 10. Interesting qualifying session. And it's going to get techie tomorrow, isn't it? Going to get techie with all the new rules around bloody tyres, and you got to use 2 mediums, and then you got to do this and you got to do that. I don't know how I feel about the sprint race format. I think they've, in theory, I don't hate the principle, but I think there's some tinkering, some tweaking to be done. I'll be honest with you. I don't think its current form is its final form. I will say that much. I think there's still some evolution there to be done. It's not perfect. I mean, there's I don't know, tinkering. And they were debating it on comms, weren't they, whether to shift, don't do parc ferme after FP1, maybe allow the teams to still tinker with their set. I don't know. Curran Chandler made the point that it's a bit of a shame if you get the setup wrong and then your race is ruined, a la a Max Verstappen at Singapore was an example, but that made for the race, right? I don't know. Depends. I think they need to think it through. Lastly, Mary's not having George. You know what, though, Mary? I'll say this. I've backed George for the most part up until now. I think Lewis fans in particular have been a bit harsh on George, myself included. I will lever some self-critique in that sense. I don't think I've been awfully kind. You guys have seen the thumbnails where I've got him in. I've got the mugshot of him in prison. It is what it is, right? If people don't click the videos and nobody watches it. Ultimately, George is a racing driver, right? And he's going to do for him. I'm not expecting him to be Lewis Hamilton's handmaiden. But I feel like something has happened over the past couple of races with George, and I'm not partial. I don't like what I'm seeing from George. He doesn't care though. He's there to be. Listen, in order, I'm gonna rejig the order of priorities for George Russell. In order, reverse order. Lewis is there to get 25 points. He's there to beat Lando. And firstly, he's there to beat Lewis. Those are the 3 things he cares about in reverse order, right? And now it's become clear. I think ultimately that order of events might hamper him. I know he talks about being present on the High Performance podcast and all that stuff and focusing on each session by session. But I just think at least subconsciously, if George were honest, and I think he said as much on the Beyond the Grid podcast that was out this week, I think if George is honest, in his heart of hearts, his focus isn't 25 points from each weekend as much as it is beating Lewis, and nailing George. I think in his mind, he kind of wants to, I think a lot of the time he'd sacrifice the 25 points, especially at this point in time when the W14 isn't ready to win races. We'll say that. Andretti quickly, NASA, exactly. George needs to be a bit more, well, you know what, NASA, I think you used the wrong words in calculating. I think George is very calculating, but he just wants to, new haircut. Oh, NASA, I can't talk about haircuts. Boogie Boy says, I don't feel George has changed between his Williams time and his Merc. So Boogie Boy, to that point, I think there is a fighting gene in George Russell. Listen, he's one of those ones that when he smells blood, like when there's an overtaking move, like a Bottas at Imola, or like when he smells something like a shark, like he's almost like primal instinct, like he can't help himself. He's like a moth to a flame almost. He's got a bite, like a Venus flytrap, right? It's like it's instinct to him. That's just the way he's wired as a driver. But then I think he's quite calculating. And I think this is what ruffles the feathers of Lewis and Lewis Hamilton fans, that they see him kind of putting in these calls that aren't necessarily in line with what the team had laid out for both of them. Like, I don't know, the pit stop at Zandvoort, leaving Lewis Hamilton out to dry, changing the pit stop, changing the strategy at the last race. He's a strategic maverick, and even if you listen to him on the Beyond the Grid podcast, I think they talk about it, and he's like, "Listen, I'm not racing for 10th. I did a cheeky risk reward calc, talking about Suzuka. Said, at one stop, I would have probably finished 7th anyway." That sort of stuff I don't hate. That's Alan Prost levels. I think if we're judging these drivers by their race IQ and their ability to like think through a strategy and do a cheeky risk to reward calc and take an action, I think George, Carlos Sainz, Alonso, Max is probably getting there. Max without pressure is probably getting there as well. Lewis maybe. I don't know. But I'll say this lastly on that race IQ stuff. Where I've been, as a Lewis Hamilton fan, a fan, one of the rare ones who is quite open and honest about criticising Lewis Hamilton. If we do get a machine in Mercedes that can challenge for Red Bull next year, somebody put the word out to Sir Lewis Hamilton, Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton, to have a look at those restarts, man. I mean, he's just... Max Verstappen, to be fair, Max has them all under manners, barring maybe Charles. Off of restarts on the back of a safety car, Max Verstappen always has them all under manners. But Lewis, oh God, so bad, so bad. It's like it's almost like it's almost like they catch him napping every. Okay, so the last one, I want to say, it's at Singapore, wasn't it? He was good on the last one, but 9 times out of 10, it's like Lewis. He hasn't even charged his battery or anything. He's like he's out to lunch, like when the safety car. Like, meanwhile, Max Verstappen, he's got his race restarts down pat. It's almost like Max gauges. He'll tinker with the mode of his restart depending on who's behind him. Like it's almost like he's got a restart for Lewis. He's got a different one for George, a different one for Charles, a different one for Checo. Like he knows all of their weaknesses as far as the race restart. And with my Lewis Hamilton cap firmly on, man, I hope between now and whenever it gets competitive that Lewis has a look at that, because, I mean, bloody Nora. And finally, Peddlers, I've gone super long, haven't I? Jeez, 62 minutes. Cameron, of course, I hope you guys are enjoying this. Smash the like if you could. Lastly, on Andretti, I will give the cookie cut answer to the Andretti thing. Of course, F1 could do with more teams. It could. And the Concord Agreement says that there's a maximum of 12. Currently, we have 10. On the grid starts, Mary, not on the restart for the safety car, though. Challenge you, Mary. Next time there's a safety car restart, peddlers, watch Lewis Hamilton. Like he most of the time, not on the last one. I think when I said the last one was at Singapore, discount the last safety car restart, but look at all the others. Lewis Hamilton just goes, 9 times out of 10, he goes backwards. It's bonkers, and I just don't understand it. Like, can't afford, when it gets competitive again, can't have that. Telling you, we can't have that. NASA says, can anyone please ask Peter Windsor, how on earth does Lewis do everything outside the track? Well, NASA, so, okay, quickly, NASA, I'll try and answer this question. Yeah, grid, I agree with you, Mary, but the safety car restart, Mary, jeez. NASA, I would try and get that question to Peter Windsor because he'd probably answer it better than me. I think Peter's answer would be something like, I think it's astounding that Lewis Hamilton still has all this, still is driving as well as he is, this deep and late into his career with all of these external distractions. I think from Peter's perspective, that's the gift and the curse with Lewis. Like, he's an incredible man, an incredible driver. It's incredible that he can still do that. Because not a lot of people could, right? Not a lot of people can. Not a lot of people have, or any, for that matter. Go on then, Andretti. I've got nothing to say on the Andretti thing. Would I like to see another team in F1? Probably. Interestingly, Lewis reacted to Denny's tweet earlier today and said, I'm going to misquote him. Let me paraphrase. He was responding to somebody that said, Lewis supports Andretti's application. To which Lewis responded, I don't support Andretti. I support another team. I would support another team that would come in and encourage additional, increased diversity in F1. That's chaos, right? The first clause that he said fairly explicitly that I don't support Andretti. Because what a lot of that's chaos, bloody no, as I'm saying it now. Let me say this very quickly on this, because this is madness. What the drivers were saying in the press conference was something to the effect of, George's answer was really, really good, right? A proper exam answer. He said something to the effect of, I'm agnostic as to whether Andretti should or shouldn't get in. Whatever the FIA and FOM decide, they'll do their due diligence and they'll make the right decision. Cool. That Lewis has been the only driver to explicitly say, I don't support Andretti. I think, okay, here, I'm going to try and get into Lewis Hamilton's head here. Chaos, yeah, smash the like, Mary, moderator extraordinaire, please do. Here's what I think. Lewis has a tendency of doing this sometimes. Not that he mixes up his words, because he's very articulate. What I think Lewis wanted to say, you know what, since we're getting techie, last 5 minutes, guys, and I'm gonna leave you to go and enjoy your Friday evenings. But this is we always get techie late, don't we? Always happens. I'm going to bring up the tweet, so I don't want to misquote it because the words here are quite important. It's a big issue, isn't it? Right, let's look at this. Right, so Denny said, the legend that is, Lewis is pro Andretti joining Formula One. Lewis's response to Denny at FIA Girly was, nope, don't support Andretti. Just the idea of another team in future, if it's a chance to make our sport more diverse. Here's what I think. So what he said is, I don't support Andretti. The I in brackets, the I is unsaid. What I think Lewis Hamilton means is he's not I'm not saying that I support Andretti. He's saying what George has said at the press conference. I'm neither for or against. He's not saying that he doesn't support them. He's not against Andretti, I don't think. He's saying that he wants a team. If a team's going to come in, he wants that team to be a team that's for diversity. Can read that tweet, right? It's almost like he's just punched it out before he's gone onto the grid or something. The words say nope, don't support Andretti. Bloody Nora. You can take that a number of ways. Is he saying the imperative? No, we shouldn't support Andretti. Is he saying I don't support Andretti? It's a weird one. You know, one of those ones where you say, I don't dislike. I don't like. It's weird, right? I don't like is different to I dislike. If you don't like, that just means that like is the absence of like, right? It's very different to dislike. So I don't think, word spaghetti. Right. Finally, to conclude. What I don't think Lewis is saying is, I don't like Andretti. Sorry, he's not saying I dislike Andretti. He's saying I just don't like Andretti. Not I dislike them. Oh, God. Word spaghetti. I'm going to end it on there, fellas, before linguistically I go crazy. You guys have been legends, man. I'm going to start to try and do more of these, I promise, because I enjoy them and I'm hoping that you enjoy them. Listen, I've got to get better. I've got to structure them more. A lot of them are just going to be word salads and me just riffing and monologuing and giving you my thoughts and opinions and trying to dissect for what I've just seen in Quali or the race. Semantics, Macon, a little bit. But do you get what I mean, Macon? Dislike and don't like are two levels, right? Dislike is here. Don't like is here. Dislike is like anyway. Don't like is an active. Anyway, Macon, you've got me back. Proper semantics, but I do pride myself as a bit of a linguist, but I'm not doing very well with the articulation here. Listen, guys, I'm going to wrap as moderator extraordinaire Mary encourages me to go and take a nap because I can no longer speak anymore. Thank you so much for watching. Do me a favour, smash a like on the way. What is don't like, dislike, do like. Oh my gosh. You guys are absolute legends. I'm going to try and get back after the race on Sunday and we can break down. I'll do 45 minutes just talking, riffing, going through my outcomes, what I took from the race. Lots of opinion, lots of linguistic and semantics. Back on struggling, dislike, don't like, whatever. Have a fantastic Friday. Enjoy the rest of your race weekend. I hope you enjoy the sprint quali tomorrow and have a fantastic race. I'll catch you on Sunday. Between now and then, as always, remember to look but never stare.